welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. Here we are in episode 86, and today David is going to be made king of all of Israel. Remember that he was king in Hebron for 7.5 years, but we'll come back to that in just a moment. Today we're going to be in 2 Samuel 4 and 5, and just a quick peek at 1 Chronicles 11 and 1 Chronicles 14, both of which overlap with the text we're going to be looking at today. So I'll try to remind you of where these texts parallel in Chronicles as well. All right? So 2 Samuel 4, beginning in verse 1. Remember, Ishbosheth, Saul's son, has been ruling for a couple of years. And it says this: when Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, his courage failed, and all of Israel was dismayed. Now Saul's son had two men who were captains of raiding bands. The name of one was Baanah, and the name of the other was Rechab, sons of Ramon, a man of Benjamin from Beeroth. The Beerothites fled to get him and have been sojourners there to this day. Now Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. So that will be important. We'll come back to that guy later. And his nurse took him up and fled, and as she fled in her haste, he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. Now the sons of Rimmon, the sons of the Beerothite, and Rechab, and Baanah set out, and about the heat of the day they came to the house of Ishbosheth, and he was taking his noonday rest. That must be nice, right? Every day you take a noonday rest. It's so scheduled that your servants know about it, like you have your noonday rest. They came into the midst of the house as if to get wheat, and they stabbed him in his stomach, and then Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. When they came into the house as he lay on his bed in his bedroom, they struck Ishbosheth and put him to death, and they beheaded him, and they took his head and went by the way of Arabah all night, and brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron. And they said to the king, remember David's king in Hebron, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord is avenged on my lord the king this day, and on Saul and all of his offspring." So these two men take it upon themselves. They're like, "Oh, look, let's kill Ishbosheth. We'll go to David. He'll love us for it." They're seeing this power struggle, and they're seeing Ishbosheth become weaker and David become stronger. They're probably thinking, "Oh, we can have a place in David's kingdom." So David answers them, though. They bring him the head of Ishbosheth. I think that this is just an interesting thing that the Philistines did the same thing with Saul's head. They carried it away. Look at what David answers them in verse 9. David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity, when one told me, 'Behold, Saul is dead,' and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house, on his own bed, shall I not require his blood at your hand and destroy you from off this earth?" And David commanded his young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and their feet and hanged them beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. Then, this is chapter 5, then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Behold, we are your bone and your flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led us out and brought us in. And the Lord has said to you, 'You shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over all of Israel.'" And so this is a little bit back to what we saw in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, where all the people were coming to David in Hebron to make him king. Verse 3 of chapter 5 says this: "So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned a total of 40 years. At Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. So this would tell us that probably Abner did not anoint Ishbosheth right away. Remember, David's in Hebron, and he's gaining more power. Abner anoints Ishbosheth to be king at some point, and then Ishbosheth dies, and now all of the people are beginning to gather to David at Hebron to make him king. Verse 6 says this: "And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, 'You will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off,' thinking David cannot come in here." Now this is one of my favorite things in the Old Testament. It is a nuanced thing. It's small. I'll tell you this. I don't know if I've ever taught this. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. But this is interesting. So Jerusalem is in the middle of this portion of Judah, and they've never been able to get the Jebusites out of there. In fact, back in Joshua 15:63, when the land is being divided, it said that the Jebusites were in Jerusalem, were there to that day, and that the Israelites couldn't remove them from it. So under the leadership of Samuel, the Israelites have never been able to get the Jebusites to leave Jerusalem. Under the kingship of Saul, remember he reigned from Gibeah. Under the kingship of Saul, the people have never been able to get the Jebusites to leave Jerusalem. But David wants Jerusalem to be his home base for his kingdom. And it's perfect because we know all the way back in Genesis 14, which we still haven't looked at. We'll do that still in Hebrews. But Melchizedek, he reigned over Jerusalem. He was the king of righteousness. He became the king of peace. We know that Jerusalem has incredible significance in the New Testament. We know that the new Jerusalem is Zion, the heavenly city, the return of God. We know that Jesus will be king over the new Jerusalem. And we know that God will make, in Revelation 21, the new Jerusalem come out of heaven, collide with earth, and make all things new. So Jerusalem, huge, very significant for us as Christians. And at this point, none of the Israelites have lived there because they haven't been able to get the Jebusites out. The Jebusites are so confident in their position because they've been here at this point now for nearly 400 years. They've been in this city. The people of God came into the promised land, lived in the promised land. They were ruled by judges, and they've been here now for 400 years, and they still haven't been able to get the Jebusites out. They've just never been able to clear them out of Jerusalem. And they're so confident, the Jebusites are so confident, they're like, what could David do? Even the lame and the blind, our lame and blind could keep David from coming into the city. So like, that's how confident the Jebusites are. And this is what's so key. This is so cool to me. I'm super worried now because I've hyped it up so much that you're not going to think it's cool, but it'll be okay because I still think it is. So it says, even our lame and blind are going to keep David from coming in here. Verse 7, nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, And golly, man, that's a reference. When the Bible speaks of Zion, it's speaking spiritually. It's one of my favorite Psalms where Jesus is testifying, it's Christ testifying, this one was born in Zion, this one belongs to the Lord, this one belongs to God. And I love it. So nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David, Jerusalem. And David said on that day, let whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him go up by the water shaft to attack those lame and blind who are hated by David's soul. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame will not come into the house. Okay, this is where it gets really cool. So the Jebusites are like, we're not worried about David at all. Our lame and blind men could fend him off. And so David says, who's going to go up into Jerusalem? Who's going to go up into this city and destroy these so-called lame and blind men? And so they go in and they annihilate the Jebusites. And from that day forward, David says, the lame and the blind aren't welcome in my city. The lame and the blind. Now, that's a reference not to physical lameness and physical blindness, but that's a reference to these Jebusites. These lame and blind people aren't allowed in the house. They're not allowed in the city. And it's so important for us to understand this, because when you go back into Exodus and you look at the temple of the Lord and you look at the tent of meeting, the lame and the blind weren't allowed to minister before the Lord. The lame and the blind weren't allowed to come into the presence of the Lord. Like there's all this imagery here. And yet when you get to the New Testament, what did Jesus do? He healed the lame and the blind. Like specifically, that's repeated for us over and over again. When you get into Luke 14, there's this beautiful picture of this great banquet that is being thrown by the king, by the master of the house. It's a picture of God throwing the final banquet when he welcomes people in to his kingdom and welcomes people into heaven. And he says, go out into the cities and go and tell the people that it's time to be gathered for the banquet. And the story in Luke 14 is that they go to these people and the people start making excuses of why they don't want to come into the banquet. And they say, well, I've just bought a field. I need to go and take care of my field. Or I've just bought some oxen and I need to test them out. Or I just got married. I don't have time to come to the banquet. And the servants come back and they say to the master of the house, we've invited everyone to the banquet, but they won't come. And the master's enraged and he goes, then go out into the highways and the byways, go out into the side roads. And he says, and invite and bring in the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind. Bring them in. And Jesus is using this story to rebuke the Pharisees, to rebuke the scribes, to rebuke the people who should have known better, and they're not getting it. They're not understanding the kingdom of heaven. But who is? Who's understanding what Jesus is proclaiming? The lame, the blind, the crippled, the poor, the people who are destitute, the people who recognize that they're sinners. And so here's what's so cool to me is David says, the blind and the lame are not allowed into my house. The first David says that, right? Like David is a picture, a foreshadowing picture of Christ. But the physical King David who builds Zion, he calls Jerusalem Zion. He builds Jerusalem to be this bastion of power and glory and grace, a testimony of what God has done. And he says the lame and the blind aren't allowed here. And then Jesus comes, the descendant of David. Jesus, this king, comes and he heals the lame and the blind. And he tells this story of let the lame and the blind come to me. Let the lame and the blind come into my house. Let them come and be part of my kingdom. And it is just this incredible thing where you and I were the lame and the blind. You and I were the crippled ones. We were the ones who didn't see the truth, and then we met Jesus and we saw the truth, and we were the sinners, and we have been brought into Zion. We've been brought into Jerusalem. And David's statement was, don't let the lame and the blind come in here. And I love this overturning. I love this reversal. We talked early on in the book of Genesis about some of the reversals that we see in the Bible. I love this reversal where David says, the lame and the blind are not welcomed into Jerusalem. The lame and the blind are not welcome into Zion. And Jesus does the exact opposite and says, bring the lame and the blind to me. They're part of my kingdom. And I love it. It is absolutely one of my favorite things. And that's probably the longest I've ever talked about it. I honestly don't know that I've ever said that. I think I've mentioned it once to Pierce and Micah in passing. But I don't know that I've ever talked about it before. So super excited. Anyway. Verse 9 says, David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built the city all around from the Milo inward. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. And Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees and carpenters and masons to build David a house. David knew that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. And David took more concubines and more wives from Jerusalem, and he came from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. And these are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem. And there's a list of names, but the one that's of significance to us is Solomon. Now, verse 17 says this, when the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David, but David heard of it and went down into the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim, and David inquired of the Lord. He does this a lot. We've seen this a few times already. Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, for I will give them into your hand. And David came to Baal Perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, the Lord has burst through my enemies before me like a bursting flood. Therefore the name is called Baal Perazim. And the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. That's an interesting verse. Again, we have to let the Bible interpret the Bible. So it sounds here like the Philistines leave their idols there, and David and his men carry them away. And the conclusion that we might come to is, well, why'd they carry them away? Why are they worshiping these idols? What's happening here? I want to show you the parallel text in 1 Chronicles 14. So 1 Chronicles 14, I'm going to begin in verse 8 so you can see this here. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David, but David heard of it and went out against them. Now the Philistines had come and made a raid in the valley of Rephaim. See, same stuff. David inquired of God, shall I go up against them? Yes, you shall go up against them. And it says this, and it says, he went up to Baal Perazim, and David struck them down there, and David said, God has broken through my enemies by my hand like a bursting flood. Therefore the name is Baal Perazim. And they, the Philistines, left their gods there, and David gave the command, and they were burned. So in 1 Samuel, we see that he defeats the Philistines, and they take up all these idols, but we don't know what he does with them until we get to 1 Chronicles 14, and we see that he burns all these idols. And so we have to, I'm telling you, sometimes one verse here and one verse 100 pages later click together and tell the story more completely. And so we have to be careful that we don't throw David under the bus in 1 Samuel for carrying away the gods of the Philistines, because what we see in 1 Chronicles is the reason that he carried it away was to burn them. So he's anointed as king. This is 1 Chronicles 11. All of Israel gathered together to David at Hebron and said, behold, we are your bone and your flesh. In times past, even when Saul was king, it was you who led us and brought us in. And the Lord your God said, you shall be my shepherd of Israel, and you shall be prince over my people Israel. And we saw this already in 2 Samuel. So all the elders of Israel came to him at Hebron and made a covenant with them, and they anointed David king over Israel, according to the word spoken by Samuel. And so then he goes and he destroys Jerusalem. And so if you're I'm not going to go into 1 Chronicles 11 and 1 Chronicles 14. We literally just read them in 1 Samuel, but I just want you to see how these chapters tie together to the ones in 2 Samuel 4 and 5. But man, if anything, if I could have you think of anything as you turn me off today, think of how blessed we are that our King, Jesus, the Son of David, who reigns in the New Jerusalem, who reigns over the New Zion, think about how blessed we are that his statement is, bring the lame and the blind to me. And that is us, guys. That is us. What a blessing that is. Tomorrow we will be in 2 Samuel 6, 1 Chronicles 13, and 1 Chronicles 15. And I will see you then. Have a good day. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.